The vastness of space was a void that humanity had learned to navigate. For centuries, humans had conquered the stars, stretching their influence across a network of colonies, cities on moons, and ships that sailed the cosmos. Their ships were magnificent, sleek, built from alloys stronger than anything nature could have provided, and powered by technology that bent the laws of physics themselves. But despite all their achievements, a nagging fear clung to them, a fear they couldn't fully understand. That fear had a name: the Obsidian Widow. It wasn't a force of nature or a cosmic event, but a being, or perhaps an entire species, whose reputation struck dread in the hearts of all who knew the name. The Widow was rumored to be a survivor of a once thriving galactic empire that had long since vanished. Their technology, unknown to humanity, was described as terrifying, shifting in ways that broke the boundaries of space and time. It wasn't just a weapon. It was an existential threat, a force that bent reality to its will. There were whispers that it could unravel the very fabric of life itself. For years, humanity had heard of the Widow's reign, felt its shadow in their darkest fears. But now, in the year 3572, they had decided they would no longer stand idle in the face of such power. They would confront it head-on. Elara Hawke stood before the war room's expansive holotable, staring at the strategic map of the galaxy. The map had once been a vibrant collection of flourishing colonies, alliances, and trade routes. Now it was little more than a graveyard of unfulfilled promises. The coordinates of the Obsidian Widow's territory flashed ominously on the screen, like a blight that spread ever closer to the heart of human civilization. Captain Hawke was no stranger to war, but this felt different. She had led fleets against alien species, fought off insurrections, and quashed uprisings on distant moons. But nothing had prepared her for what lay ahead. The whispers of the Widow's power were more than rumors. They were a warning. She rubbed her temples, trying to shake the feeling of inevitability. She wasn't afraid, no, she was beyond fear. But she was deeply unsettled. In her years of service, she had seen many things. Friends, comrades, entire fleets vanishing into the void without a trace. But this was something else entirely. The Widow was a force of destruction so perfect, so relentless, it made the greatest military minds in the galaxy seem like children playing at war. Captain Hawke? A voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Commander Valen, her second-in-command. Tall, with a military bearing that matched his reputation. But today, there was a visible unease about him. He stood rigidly at attention, a flicker of hesitation in his posture. He knew what they were facing. The same fear, the same questions danced behind his eyes. "We're ready," Valen said, voice steady but lacking the conviction it usually held. "The fleet is assembled. 1,000 ships all under your command. 1,000 ships, a monumental force. Yet standing there in the war room, it felt like nothing more than a handful of candles in the dark." Elara met his gaze, her resolve hardening. "Ready to fail, Valen. We're about to make a run at a ghost, and ghosts don't die." Her voice was cold, but inside, her heart raced. She had seen fleets crumble, entire systems decimated by forces they couldn't even comprehend. But she had never fought something like this before. The Widow wasn't just a military threat. It was something far worse. Something that could undo everything humanity had worked so hard to build. "Failure's not an option," Valen replied. "We've come too far. Humanity doesn't give up." Elara nodded, though her mind wandered to what failure might truly mean. Could it be possible that humanity's greatest legacy wasn't its triumph, but its willingness to fight until the bitter end, no matter the cost? Before she could respond, the familiar hum of the intercom crackled to life. "Captain Hawke, this is Fleet Command. We have a new development. A signal has been detected emanating from the Widow's domain. It's a warning. It seems to be a distress call from an ancient civilization that may have encountered the Widow before. They're asking us to turn back." Elara's blood ran cold. A warning? The voice at the other end had sounded panicked, almost frantic. There was no time to process the implications of such a message. The fleet had already been set into motion, its engines burning with the determination of all those who sought to bring an end to an era of terror. But a warning from an ancient civilization, the kind of people who had lived through what humanity could only imagine. Could it be real? And if it was, what did it mean? "Keep the fleet in motion," Elara ordered. "No turning back. We can't afford hesitation now." The call ended, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Was humanity making a grave mistake? Could they try? Humanity's fate, it seemed, was about to be written in the stars, and Elara Hawke, commander of 1,000 ships, would be the one to lead them into the heart of the unknown. Whatever came next, she was ready. Or so she told herself. The Widow was waiting. And no one, not even humanity, was ready for what lay ahead. The fleet emerged from the swirling nebula of dark space into the uncharted territory of the Obsidian Widow's domain. For a brief moment, the stars seemed to dim, as though they, too, were afraid of what lay ahead. The ships glided silently through the void, engines purring like great beasts creeping into the unknown. The Cerberus, flagship of the fleet, led the charge, its sleek hull glinting under the faint starlight. On board, Captain Elara Hawke stood at the helm, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. Her mind raced, her thoughts a blur of uncertainty. The warning had been clear. An ancient civilization had come to a tragic end after encountering the Widow. But what if the message had been a trap? What if there was no real warning at all? These questions gnawed at Elara, but she suppressed them. Fear had no place in a captain's heart, not if she was to lead 1,000 ships into the maw of such a vast unknown. Ahead of them lay the Widow's ship, a massive, monolithic presence floating in the blackness of space like a dark star. Its surface seemed to pulse with an eerie, unnatural rhythm as though alive, breathing. A soft, unsettling hum reverberated through the hull of the Cerberus, a sound that made the hairs on the back of Elara's neck stand on end. No human technology could produce such a noise. "Captain, it's not what we expected." Lieutenant Rian Valen's voice broke through the silence, his face appearing on the holo display beside her. "Explain," Elara demanded, her voice flat, but her heart pounding in her chest. We don't understand. Its structure. It's shifting. Parts of the ship are moving. Not just the exterior, but the whole damn thing. It's like it's adapting to our presence. We can't get a clear read on its composition." Elara's brow furrowed. "So it's alive?" "I don't know, Captain. But it's not like any ship we've ever encountered." As the Cerberus approached the Widow's ship, the fleet slowed its advance. The tension was palpable, each ship's crew fully aware that they were walking a razor's edge. This close to the Widow's territory, the laws of physics themselves seemed to falter. Time itself felt unstable. A strange distortion rippled through the fleet, sending waves of unease through every ship. The longer they lingered, the more oppressive the silence became. No one dared break it, not even Elara, who felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Without warning, a pulse of energy shot out from the Widow's ship. The massive wave of power rippled outward, striking the fleet with a force that could not be measured. Systems flickered, then shut down entirely. The ships lost all communication, their engines faltering as if some unseen hand had seized control. In moments, chaos erupted. "Damn it, we've lost propulsion," Valen shouted from the comms, panic rising in his voice. The lights inside the Cerberus flickered, the ship groaning as it lurched to a halt in space. The rest of the fleet was in a similar state, their vessels now floating helplessly like leaves caught in a storm. "Brace for impact," Elara shouted, gripping the edge of the tactical table as the hum of the Widow's power pulsed again. The Widow's ship wasn't just attacking, it was playing with them. The pulse sent out another wave, tearing apart the ships in its path. The energy seemed to warp reality itself. Some ships were torn asunder, disintegrating into fragments of light and metal. Others, however, were simply gone, vanished without a trace as though they had never existed. Elara's heart skipped a beat as she realized the full extent of their situation. The Obsidian Widow wasn't merely defending itself, It was toying with them, allowing them to come close enough to think they might stand a chance before erasing them completely. "Captain?" Valen's voice was shaky. "The fleet's been decimated. We're the last ones left." Elara clenched her fists, her pulse quickening as she scanned the remaining ships. There were only a handful of survivors scattered in the void. The rest were gone. The Widow had wiped them out without mercy, without effort. "We're not done yet," Elara said through gritted teeth. "We need to regroup. There's still a way out of this." But even as she spoke, doubt crept in. Was there truly a way out? The Widow's ship had proven to be more than just a military force. It was something far beyond human comprehension, a presence that seemed to mock their technology, their strategy, and their very existence. Humanity was no longer the dominant species in the galaxy. They were fragile, mortal beings, standing before an ancient force that had been watching for eons, waiting for them to make. "Captain, there's something strange happening," said Dr. Varric, the AI specialist who had been monitoring the Widow's energy signatures. His voice was oddly calm, a sharp contrast to the panic that had gripped the others. "What is it?" Elara asked, her voice tight with anticipation. "It's evolving. The Widow's ship, I mean. It's not just a ship, it's more like a living organism. It's adapting to us. But here's the kicker, it's reading our thoughts, our intentions." A cold shiver ran down Elara's spine. "You're saying it knows what we're going to do before we do?" "Exactly. It's like it's aware of us, of every move we make. It's anticipating everything." Elara stared at the display, her mind racing. The implications of Dr. Varric's discovery were staggering. The Widow was not merely a predator. It was a predator with intelligence that surpassed their own. And if it was watching their every move, that meant there was nowhere to hide, no strategy they could employ that wouldn't be countered before they even executed it. "Captain," Valen's voice was urgent. "We need to do something. We can't just sit here and wait to die." Elara's fingers tightened on the command chair. She had faced death before, many times in fact. But this felt different. This was not a battle against a rival species or a rebellion to quell. This was a fight for survival against something that was beyond their understanding, a force of nature that had been watching them, waiting for them to step into its trap. "I'm not waiting to die," Elara whispered, staring at the dark, shifting form of the Obsidian Widow's ship. "We need to fight back, and we need to do it now." The problem was, in this war of minds, they were facing an enemy that was playing a different game entirely. The fleet had been scattered to the winds, only a few ships left clinging to the very edge of survival. The remnants of the once proud force now drifted aimlessly through the void, with the Widow's ship still looming in the distance, an implacable presence in the dark. Elara stood at the helm of the Cerberus, her eyes fixed on the glowing remains of the fleet as though she could will them to come back together. But she knew better. The battle was already lost. Yet, there was still something she had learned over the years. You never stopped fighting. Not until the last breath. The Widow wasn't like anything they had ever fought. It wasn't simply an alien species or a hostile force. It was a force of nature, a cosmic entity whose motives, if they even existed, were as unfathomable as the deep void itself. Humanity had underestimated it, and now they were paying the price. Elara stood in silence, her mind whirling. It had been hours since the Widow's pulse had ripped through the fleet, but the shaking in her bones hadn't subsided. The terror that gripped her was unlike anything she'd ever known. She had been on countless battlefields, faced off against enemies that were as brutal as they were determined. But this was different. There was no violence here, no rage. The Widow didn't need to fight. It simply existed, and that was enough to bring down the most powerful fleet humanity had ever assembled. "Captain?" Valen's voice was low, almost reverent as he entered the bridge. He looked at her with concern, his usual composure replaced by a subtle edge of fear. "We can't just stay here, we have to do something." "Like what?" Elara muttered, her gaze never leaving the vast emptiness ahead. We've lost, look at us. We're nothing but pieces in a game we don't understand. But even as she spoke, she knew that wasn't true. She had never been one to accept defeat so easily. She had seen it before, and she'd fought her way through it. But now she wasn't sure what fighting would even look like. The Widow's ship had seemed to sense their every move, anticipate their every strategy. And now, even with the shattered remnants of her fleet, Elara was aware that they were being watched. Every thought, every command, every weakness laid bare to the Widow. "What's your plan, then?" Valen asked, crossing his arms, his voice rising with frustration. "We can't just sit here and wait for it to finish us off. We've got to be able to fight back. There's got to be something. Anything." Elara turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "The question isn't whether we can fight back. The question is whether we even stand a chance." Her voice was hard, laced with the bitterness that came from years of leadership. But deep down, she knew he was right. They couldn't just give up. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, there was always something humanity had, something the Widow couldn't take away. The rest of the surviving crew members gathered around the bridge, their faces grim but resolute. Each of them had been through wars, had seen battles lost and won, but none of them had ever faced anything like this. The Widow was not an enemy that could be crushed by firepower or strategy. It was something far beyond them. And Varric nodded, his eyes alight with a cold, intense focus. "Why not? If there's one thing we've learned in all these years, it's that humanity's greatest strength lies in its ability to adapt. We adapt faster than anything the universe can throw at us. We've survived all this time. We can figure this out." Valen stepped forward, a look of determination on his face. "I agree. We can't just wait here for it to finish us off. Let's search for anything we can use. If we can understand how the Widow operates, we might just have a chance." The crew scrambled into action, their movement sharp, efficient. They began digging through ancient databases, accessing everything from fragmented records to long-lost star maps. Time was against them, and as each second passed, the weight of their situation pressed harder and harder on their shoulders. Hours passed with little success. The information they were uncovering was sparse, scattered across forgotten systems and unreachable files. But the more they dug, the more they began to realize the horrifying truth. The Widow wasn't just a being or a ship. It was something else entirely. It was a parasite, a harbinger of entropy itself. It thrived on the destruction of civilizations, feeding off the very essence of life. The more advanced a species became, the more it attracted the Widow's attention. It was an ancient, unknowable force that eradicated anything that threatened the cosmic balance it represented. And as they delved deeper, they uncovered something even more disturbing. A brief record from an ancient race, one that had once lived in harmony with the Widow, before it had turned on them. The record mentioned a key, an artifact said to have the power to disrupt the Widow's influence. It was buried somewhere on the outskirts of known space, but there was no map, no coordinates, just the cryptic words that suggested it might be the only way to defeat the Widow, and even that wasn't certain. "We have to find it," Elara said, her voice shaking with the weight of her decision. "It's our only shot. We can't stay here and wait to be wiped out. We need to act. Now." Valen nodded, though the grim reality of the situation hung heavy in the air. "We don't have much time." As Elara turned to face the viewscreen, her eyes scanned the darkness of space, the Widow's ship still hovering in the distance. She knew what had to be done. The last remaining human fleet was going to have to leave everything behind and venture into the unknown, into a part of space that had been forgotten by the universe itself, a place where the very laws of reality could be broken by the Widow's will. But this was humanity's way. To the last, they would fight. And maybe, just maybe, they would find a way to turn the tide. They would find the key. They would strike back. The final leap into the unknown was always the hardest, and Elara Hawke felt it now more than ever. The Cerberus, barely holding itself together after hours of unpredictable space travel, hurtled through the void toward the coordinates, if they could even be called coordinates, that Dr. Varric had painstakingly uncovered from the fragmented records of the ancient race. Their destination was not a star, a planet, or even a nebula, but an isolated corner of the galaxy that seemed to defy all logic. In this place, the laws of physics bent in ways that no one had understood. Time itself might be broken here. The rest of the fleet had dissolved long ago, scattered to the winds by the Widow's unpredictable attacks. Now, it was just the Cerberus, a single ship carrying the hopes of humanity, its crew driven by nothing but desperation and the faintest sliver of hope that the key to defeating the Widow existed. The surviving crew knew that if this failed, they would be the last of humanity, and so they pressed on. "Captain," Valen's voice crackled through the comm, steady, but laced with concern. "We're entering the zone. Things are starting to get weird." Elara stared at the swirling mess of stars outside the view screen. The fabric of space was warping around them, the familiar constellations stretching into impossibly long lines. The ship shuddered as the gravitational pull of an unseen force yanked at its hull. It was as if the entire region of space was being twisted, drawn into a vortex that wanted to consume them whole. "I see it," Elara replied, her voice a whisper despite herself. "Hold steady. We've come this far. We're not turning back now." But as she spoke, a dread sense of inevitability gnawed at her insides. Whatever this place was, it was not just another star system. It was a place where the Widow's power thrived, where it could manipulate reality as it pleased, a place where even the most advanced technology would be rendered powerless if it didn't conform to the Widow's will. "We should be close," Dr. Varric's voice interrupted her thoughts. He sounded unnervingly calm. "There's an object just ahead. Something unnatural. It could be the artifact." "That's it," Elara said, awe creeping into her voice. "That's the key." But even as she spoke, she could feel the Widow's presence looming. It was aware of them now, aware of their desperation. The artifact was not just a weapon, it was a beacon, and it had drawn the Widow in. A harsh, otherworldly screech echoed through the ship's comm system, as if the very fabric of space was being torn apart. Elara's blood ran cold. She knew what was coming. The Widow's ship had found them. "Captain." Valen's voice was frantic. "It's coming, it's—" Before he could finish, the artifact flared with a blinding light. The Cerberus jolted as if it had collided with something far beyond its comprehension. The ship was pulled forward, dragged by an invisible force into the center of the artifact's radiance. "We're inside it," Varric exclaimed, his voice filled with both disbelief and wonder. "This is it. We're in the artifact's field." Elara's mind raced. This was supposed to be their weapon against the Widow, but they weren't ready for what it was doing to them. The artifact was alive, its energy resonating through the ship in ways that made her head spin. The Cerberus began to shudder violently, its hull groaning as though it were about to collapse. "Get us out of here," Elara shouted, slamming her hand against the controls. But it was no use. The ship was no longer under her command. It was as if the Widow itself had seized control of their vessel, bending it to its will. And then, through the chaos, a voice echoed in her mind, cold, ancient, and filled with malice. "You cannot escape. You never could." The Widow had made its move. It was no longer a ship. It was a presence that spanned across dimensions, wrapping its tendrils around the very essence of the Cerberus. It was not merely manipulating the ship's systems. It was unraveling reality itself, pulling them into a new, distorted version of space. Elara clutched the armrest, her mind spinning with the realization that they had only one chance left, one final gamble. She turned to Dr. Varric, who had remained eerily calm despite the growing storm around them. "Is there any way to activate the artifact? Any way to use it against the Widow?" Varric's fingers flew across his console, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's not just an artifact, Captain. It's a doorway, a nexus. The key isn't just to stop the Widow. It's to rewrite the rules. But we don't know how to control it." The ship jolted again, and Elara felt a deep pang of desperation. They were running out of time. The Widow was closing in, its power overwhelming their ship's systems. If they didn't act soon, they would all be lost. Her hand shot out toward the controls. "We can't just let it happen. Whatever it takes, activate it. Now." With a sharp intake of breath, Varric initiated the sequence. The artifact flared brighter, its energy flooding the ship. For a moment, time itself seemed to bend, stretching, warping. And then, as though the universe itself was holding its breath, everything went silent. A wave of white-hot light engulfed them. The ship went dark. For a moment, there was nothing but the weight of silence and the terrifying uncertainty of what came next. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the blinding light receded. The Cerberus was still intact, barely, but everything had changed. Elara staggered to her feet, her senses overwhelmed by what she saw. The Widow's ship, once an all-consuming presence, was now still. It was as if it had been frozen in time. Its pulsing energy had ceased, and it was now a lifeless mass in the void. The artifact, the key, had worked, but the cost was still unclear. Elara didn't know if they had just sealed their victory, or if they had only unleashed something far worse. The truth was, the universe had shifted, and they were standing on the precipice of something greater and more dangerous than they could ever have imagined. The Widow had been stopped, but at what price? What had they truly unleashed? The answers lay in the silence of space, and Elara knew that, for better or worse, humanity's fight had only just begun. The silence in the wake of the artifact's explosion was deafening. Elara stood at the bridge of the Cerberus, her eyes fixed on the viewscreen. The Widow's ship, once an unstoppable force, now lay dormant in the vast emptiness of space, its form unnaturally still. A sense of eerie calm had descended over them, but it wasn't victory. Not yet. They had succeeded in activating the artifact, but the consequences of their actions were still unfolding. The artifact's energy had torn through the very fabric of the cosmos, reshaping their reality in ways they couldn't yet understand. The laws of physics had been altered. Time seemed fluid. The Cerberus had barely survived the wave of energy, its systems on the verge of collapse. Elara could feel the weight of the moment, like standing at the edge of a precipice, with no way of knowing whether the ground would hold or if they would plummet into the abyss. "We did it," Valen said, his voice tinged with awe but also a deep uncertainty. He stood beside her, staring at the immobile Widow ship. His words were simple, yet they carried an unspeakable weight. "We stopped it." Elara didn't reply at first. There was something in the air, something she couldn't quite place. The Widow was gone, or at least dormant. But what now? What had they unleashed? Was the universe truly safer? Or had they made a terrible mistake? The questions echoed in her mind, but she knew there were no easy answers. "We don't know what this means," Elara said, her voice low. "We've changed something, and it might be beyond our understanding." Varric, who had been working at his console in silence, suddenly spoke. "It's not just the Widow we've affected. The artifact, the key, it rewrote the laws around us. We've altered time, space, everything. It's like opening a door we don't know how to close. We've become part of something much larger than we thought." Elara turned to him, her mind whirling. "How large are we talking about here, Varric? What have we done? Something cosmic, something ancient," he replied, his voice trembling slightly. "It's not just the Widow anymore. There are ripples. They're spreading through the fabric of space, a disturbance, a shift that we can't control. We've triggered something that was meant to be sealed." The words hung in the air, chilling in their implications. The artifact had been designed to stop the Widow, yes, but at what cost? The Widow was a force of destruction, but now humanity had woken something even bigger. Something they couldn't possibly understand. Elara's mind raced as she thought about the survivors, those few who had remained in the fleet. They had all signed up for this mission, prepared to fight against the Widow. But now, with this new cosmic disruption, would the cost be greater than any of them had ever imagined? Captain? Vylan's voice broke through her thoughts, bringing her back to the present. What do we do now? The question was simple, but the answer was anything. But humanity had faced a force it could not defeat with brute strength. It had faced the Widow, the most terrifying alien presence it had ever known, and somehow impossibly survived. But now they had crossed a line, and whatever consequences awaited them, they would have to face together. We wait, Elara said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. We wait and see what happens next. We can't undo what we've done, but we can prepare. We must be ready for whatever comes. Her words felt hollow, like a leader grasping for control in the face of the unknown. But they had no choice. The universe had shifted, and humanity had played a part in that. There was no going back. There was no way to turn time back, no way to undo the changes they had set in motion. The Cerberus floated in the stillness of space, its engines silent for the moment. Elara felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. She had led them to this point, and now it was up to her to lead them forward. Hours passed, and the crew remained in a tense silence. No one spoke much, each person lost in their own thoughts, grappling with the enormity of what they had just done. In the distance, the Widow's ship remained frozen, its once unbeatable presence now a relic, still and lifeless. And yet, Elara knew better than to think the danger was over. If anything, it was only just beginning. We need to contact command, she finally said, breaking the silence. We need to let them know what happened. They'll need to prepare for what comes next. But even as she spoke, Elara knew that no one could truly prepare for what was to come. Humanity had never faced anything like this before. The artifact had opened a door, and they had no way of knowing what might come through it. The days that followed were filled with reports and analysis, though they brought no answers. The remnants of the Widow's ship remained motionless in space, but the disturbances in space-time continued to spread. Stars flickered erratically, and entire sectors of space seemed to grow colder, darker, as if some unseen force was pulling them into a deep, suffocating void. The ripples from the artifact's activation were now felt across the galaxy. But humanity did not shrink from the unknown. Despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, there was something else. Something more powerful than any alien threat or cosmic anomaly. It was the same thing that had driven humanity to survive against and so humanity would rise as it always had. They would face the unknown and learn to navigate this new reality, whatever it held. They would not be cowed. Not now. Not ever. And as Elara Hawke looked out across the stars, she knew one thing. With certainty, the fight was far from over. It had only just begun. The quiet that had followed the battle with the Obsidian Widow was deceptive. Space, once a vast sea of possibility, now seemed like an expanse of unknowns, filled with ripples that neither science nor human understanding could explain. The survivors aboard the Cerberus had long since come to terms with the fact that they had changed the course of their fate, and perhaps the entire universe's. They had confronted the Widow, had faced the unthinkable, and now they were left with the aftermath. A new, fractured reality where the lines between known and unknown had blurred beyond recognition. But even in this quiet, something shifted beneath the surface. Elara stood, alone on the observation deck, staring out at the swirling vortex of stars. The universe felt different. The weight of what had happened hung in the air, thick with unspoken questions. The Widow's ship was still there, motionless, suspended, in the dark. It had been subdued for now, but the very fact that it was frozen in place, not destroyed, felt like an ominous reminder of how fragile their victory was. She wondered if this was the end, or if it was merely the beginning of something far larger than they could imagine. They had thought the Widow was their greatest threat, but the artifact had opened a door, and what lay beyond it was a mystery. One thing was clear: the universe would never be the same again. Captain, Valen's voice broke her reverie. He stepped up beside her, his expression unreadable. We've just received a transmission from Fleet Command. They're asking for you. Elara turned to him, the weight of leadership settling back onto her shoulders. What do they want? They want to know what happened out here, what we've unleashed. They've already started gathering reports from the surviving colonies. The disturbances in spacetime are getting worse and they need answers. Elara sighed, turning back to the view screen. Tell them we'll brief them when we're ready, but they'll have to be prepared for something bigger than anything they could have expected. Valen hesitated. And if they're not ready? What then? Elara's eyes narrowed as she thought about it. Then we'll make them ready. Humanity has a way of adapting. We've done it before, and we'll do it again. But even as she spoke the words, Elara felt the weight of uncertainty. The galaxy was no longer just a place for human ambition. It was a stage for something far older, far more dangerous than they had ever realized. The artifact had not just neutralized the Widow, it had unlocked something. Whether that was a gift or a curse, Elara could not yet say. In the distance, the Widow's ship remained motionless. Elara could sense its presence, its strange, cold awareness. It was like a sleeping giant waiting for the next move. And beyond it, across the fabric of space, the ripple of changes continued to spread. Strange signals, anomalies that defied understanding, and disturbances that hinted at the presence of something far beyond human comprehension. As Elara gazed into the depths of space, she knew this was not the end of their story. This was just another chapter in an ongoing saga of humanity's struggle against forces it could barely understand. The universe was a far more dangerous and complicated place than they had ever believed, and the fight, whatever it looked like, was far from over. Prepare the ship, Elara said quietly. We've got work to do. The future's waiting and we're not backing down. As the Cerberus shifted back into motion, moving toward an uncertain future, one thing was clear. Humanity was not going to stand idly by. They would face whatever came next, whatever new threats, unknown forces, or ancient secrets that had been unleashed. The future was theirs to shape, no matter what the cost. And somewhere, in the darkness of space, a new force began to stir. Whether ally or enemy, it was coming, and humanity would meet it head-on. For in the galaxy's vast, uncharted territories, there were no easy answers, only endless frontiers.